Hello, everybody. Welcome to this online event of MECLA, the Materials and Embodied Carbon Leaders Alliance. Today's event is all about local government and shining a spotlight on some of the terrific work being done by councils around Australia, their suppliers, and policymakers that impact council on their operations and approval in their function as an approval authority, also to influence the embodied carbon of projects taking place within a local government area and by councils within their own LGAs. My name is Hudson Worsley from Precinct. I have the great pleasure of being the chair of MECLA and also hosting today's event. I'm joining you today from Gadigal land of the Eora Nation, and I would like to acknowledge that we are all on Indigenous land. I pay my respect to elders past and present, and welcome any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. Welcome. You may have heard MECLA refer to the construction ecosystem, and today we'll hear from 5 people from different parts of that ecosystem as it relates to local government and different parts of the country. We will hear from councils in Western Australia, Victoria, New South Wales, a materials supplier from Queensland, and an active driver of change within the New South Wales government. So a really national perspective today. Firstly, I'll go through a background of MECLA, recognising that today we have 415 registered attendees for our Spotlight event, and many may be joining MECLA, a MECLA event for the first time, as we're specifically reaching out to the local government sector today. Some quick mechanics about the session. We're recording this event as we do with all MECLA events, meaning that if you miss it or if you enjoyed it so much you'd like to check it out again, an access link will be made available on the resources page of the MECLA website. As I mentioned, we have over 400 registered attendees today, so welcome everybody. We'll be running a webinar format with chat function in the Q&A to be addressed and answered in the panel discussion coming up. And I'd also like to remind everybody that MECLA members and attendees for today's event, please keep our governance requirements in mind. MECLA is a pre-competition space. We do not tolerate any anti-competitive behaviour. We are here to work in the common good and drive down emissions in the construction and infrastructure sectors. So if there are any conflicts of interest, please make that known and we will adjust accordingly. All right, so about MECLA. What's embodied carbon? Embodied carbon is this diagram here, a little bit technical, but it really breaks down all of the components in an internationally recognised framework of the components of construction for major buildings and infrastructure, and recognising here you can see embodied carbon that includes upfront and then whole of life. But we are primarily addressing upfront carbon, but also other forms of embodied carbon. And yeah, this diagram sits behind the ratings and the measurement frameworks, and is a really useful way. You'll hear those in the carbon bubble talk A1 to A3 or A1 to A5, and it's really talking about what process is being undertaken in product development, in construction, in the use of an asset, and then at the end of its life. And of course, ultimately, we want to be looking at circularity, which is that whole diagram, and keeping resources in the economy in use to be as efficient as possible. Next slide, please, Alexi. All right, so why is MECLA worried about embodied carbon? Well, it's not just MECLA, but we've formed this alliance, this collaboration to look at embodied carbon because there has been a lot of effort over the last 10, 15 years to reduce the embodied carbon from the built environment, the operational carbon from the built environment. These slides come from ThinkStep, who worked on behalf of Green Building Council Australia, and they found that at the moment in a major commercial building, 84% of emissions are operational and 16% are embodied carbon. But if we don't address embodied carbon and continue to address operational emissions, those numbers will flip. And so by mid-century, we'll be looking at 85% of a building's emissions coming from embodied carbon. And so to catch up with all of the effort and the good work being done around operational efficiency and operational carbon, we've brought a spotlight onto embodied carbon, and that's us. And so from the materials themselves, the bar chart on the right there is really showing that the embodied carbon at the moment is made up, how it's made up, and that unless we act, the carbon from chemical processes and process heat, you can see electricity, the yellow sector really slims down, but the others grow and drive that overall increase if we don't act. So we're acting. Next slide, please, Alexi. All right. And so local government has two big levers: the capital works and procurement policy of council's own operations, roads, pavements, stormwater, and their own, whatever their remit is. Regional councils also doing potable and wastewater, but all of those infrastructure types have large embodied carbon numbers. And so working on that is one lever. The other lever is as a planning approval authority on helping shape what is built within a local government area. The MECLA subgroup working with local governments is really targeting that capital works and procurement side of things, but important also, and we'll be hearing today a fantastic example of using planning levers to drive reductions in embodied carbon of built form within an LGA. Next slide. So what might the challenges be for local government in embodied carbon? I mentioned that we're coming today with people and ideas and examples from all around the country, very aware that getting out of the metro parts of Australia, regional locations will have limited and not full access to the low carbon materials that might be available in major metro centres. So getting out of the cities, there are different challenges for a procurement than someone operating in one of our big cities. Embodied carbon literacy. What's this about? Here we are dialing in today, interested, engaged, working in the topic, but our stakeholders maybe aren't, possibly, well, likely aren't. And so changing that, building up the literacy, just the way safety has become part of everybody's job inside council, inside any business. We need carbon literacy just to be part of business as usual. That's something we need to work on. Carbon measurement and data capture, all organisations having to work on that, but yeah, council no exception. And then the rub, the coexistence between being a planning approval authority, but really enacting state government policies around the country, and the challenges that brings, having to enforce a law that is designed by another jurisdiction can be a challenge. So these are just some of the challenges, and I really look forward to the panel discussion to crack open some more of them. Next slide, Alexi. Now, MECLA, we talk about the ecosystem. This diagram is a schematic of captures the complexity of construction and infrastructure, the ecosystem to supply the materials, the IP, the labour, the decision-making, design, and so on. Along the top, you'll see the major stages of project construction, the project life cycle. And we started with that when MECLA got going, but we realised that there was just so many other movements backwards and forwards and complexities that a linear diagram just doesn't capture the complexity. And so this ecosystem diagram was born. It's been rigor tested by many of our members, happy to say we've got 155 members of MECLA, and I think most can identify themselves and what they do on this diagram. But please have a look at it afterwards. All of the materials today will be available on the website. I'll encourage you to have a look at this and see how you can use that to push the lower carbon agenda in your own organisation. Now, of those 155 organisations, hopefully you recognise a whole swag of the brands, the logos on the slide here. But Climate Kick and Precinct, My Business and WWF, keeping things going, managing with the Secretariat, but with generous funding up front and continued from New South Wales Government. Really delighted South Australian Government has also contributed. You'll recognise local government brands, logos here, suppliers, contractors, institutions like Engineers Australia, Institute of Architects, consultancies, big developers, and so on. So we're really trying to capture the ecosystem to be able to build change, build momentum, and act together. So that's what this slide really shows. Again, for those who long-standing members, bear with me. But if you're new to MECLA, welcome. This is us. We've set about to drive reductions in the embodied carbon in the building and construction industries to bring the trajectory of emissions down onto a Paris-aligned target, and recognising how complex it is and recognising that a circular economy is where we need to get to. We do that by demonstrating the demand, so that suppliers, you could see on that last slide here, that our materials are wanted. We build capacity to grow our low emission offering, and that demand signals will show that, yep, you can do that with confidence. We've defining best practice to evaluate and measure embodied carbon. Fantastic discussion paper on our website that helps set out the landscape of measurement and evaluation. We're all about knowledge sharing. As I've said, this session will be shared, as are countless others, case studies, the dictionary on carbon, that discussion paper, and all of our spotlights are there to build the knowledge and share it. Developing the common language to enable specifications and procurement. That's where that dictionary comes involved. And the next one around transition risks. Not one of us can act on this alone. We can't achieve what we need to unless other parts of the construction ecosystem, the value chain, move with us. And so managing the transition is by working together, moving forward together, and realizing we're not on our own. We're not taking a huge risk by acting. In fact, we're negating the risk of inaction. And so that's a really important part. And we're supporting materials to get their story across: steel, cement, concrete, aluminium, other materials, engineered timber, building systems and services. They've got a story to tell as they go down their emission reduction journey, and helping understand that, support the early movers. That's why we have our working groups on materials. So that's what we're about. That's what we're doing. Thanks, Alexi. All right, now here's a part of the MECLA value proposition that I'm really proud of. Have a look at our resources page, where you'll see links to our publications, a couple of dozen case studies. You have the opportunity to sign up to our newsletter that Kati and Alexi prepare every month or so. It's just fantastic to see all that's happening across the ecosystem in the spirit of collaboration. So yeah, after this, please do check out these slides. Thank you for steering me through that, Alexi. Really appreciate that. What I'll do now is I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Paul Whelan, from the City of Melbourne. He's the Zero Carbon Operations Lead, working in city development with low embodied carbon materials and the process of measurement. This role sees Paul work across the council. Fantastic role across all that's going on across the various parts of council. and has to partner with them in areas of climate change mitigation and those projects, electrification of council assets, carbon neutral major events, sustainable procurement, and is also the council representative with us at MECLA. So Paul, you've authored the City of Melbourne's emission reduction plan. Can I hand over to you to talk through your experiences and share with us what you're doing with the City of Melbourne, please?
Thanks very much, Hudson. It would be my pleasure. Do you want me to start my video as well, or we're happy just to see the
video
presentation?
Video, please.
Okay, here I am. Please let me know if my sound drops out or gets a bit low. I think I have a below par headset here. So thanks for the introduction. I have been looking at embodied carbon at the City of Melbourne for a bit over 12 months, with my main focus being on measurement. So today, in the next 7 or 8 minutes, I'm going to take you through a bit of a journey on how we kind of started, what our first measurement project looked like, and where we're up to today. Next slide, please. So like I said, a bit of a background on why we began looking at embodied carbon. We have actually undertaken 2 major measurement pieces of work. And I guess what I'd like other local government officers to know is that getting the measurement part right to justify the work that you want to do in reducing embodied carbon is fundamental. You want your numbers to stack up when you start putting together business cases, asking for funds for projects and changing the way that you do your work. And often it's the local government officers in climate change or sustainability branches that are leading this. So getting a grip of the data from your infrastructure or capital works branches is really important, so you understand the quantum of the problem. Next slide, please. So as a carbon neutral organisation for over 10 years now, we have an active emissions reduction plan. So this sets out broadly our emissions reduction goals over a 5-year period, and it was last refreshed in 2021. What we wanted to do in the emissions reduction plan was not just look at what our regular scope 1, 2, and some scope 3 is, but we wanted to look in each iteration of this emissions reduction plan at an area of innovation. So our previous emissions reduction plan, we added in events. So these are things like Fashion Week, Music Week, Moomba, and in this most recent iteration, we wanted to add in embodied carbon. This was because we saw the work that had started happening in the construction sector of people starting to talk about embodied carbon, and we knew that we would have a significant amount of embodied carbon in our capital works pipeline, but we had no idea exactly what it was. So in that graph there, you'll see or that block graph, you'll see that the embodied emissions, as we called them when we did this, was unknown. Next slide, please. So our first step was to commission an embodied carbon footprint, and that was of our forward 4-year capital works plan. We engaged a quantity surveying firm who undertook that work for us. So they looked at our 4-year forward capital works plan and looked at our projected spend by asset type. And being a QS firm, they had a lot of knowledge around the different material inputs into those kinds of projects. So by marrying their knowledge of the material inputs to projects and our budget for those projects, they were able to come out with a pretty detailed, albeit top-down, carbon footprint. So for example, based on their knowledge and experience, they know how much concrete and how much steel and how much bluestone would go into $1 million or $2 million or $10 million of footpath renewals, and what the other costs associated with the construction and contingency should be. So based on those financial outputs and their knowledge, that top-down embodied carbon footprint was developed. The graph that you've got in front of you overlays our embodied carbon footprint, projected embodied carbon footprint over 4 years in red, with our operational carbon footprint. So you can see over the years of managing our operational emissions, we, like many other organisations, have seen big emissions cuts through things like electrification of assets, a lot of energy efficiency work, electric vehicles and renewable energy. But really, the embodied carbon of our capital works begins to dwarf our dwindling operational emissions. And it's this graph that really spoke to our executive. We were able to say, we've been doing great over the last 10 years on carbon management. And now there's this other area of carbon that nobody has been measuring, or not many people have been measuring. And this is what that liability looks like into the future. And that really gave us the authorizing environment to begin the work in earnest. What we also learnt through that kind of top-down measurement piece was that broadly, the types of projects that we undertake can be separated into two buckets. That's civil infrastructure stuff and buildings. So if we jump onto the next slide, each of the two project types that we typically do have different distinct interventions. So those streetscape projects, the interventions are simple material substitution, and that can achieve reasonably significant emissions reduction. We saw that as the best place to start, rather than looking at those building projects which are inherently more complex. So building a new library or a new aquatic centre, the interventions for reducing embodied carbon from those types of projects really start at the design phase, and they involve a lot more decision makers. Whereas if we looked at that civil stuff, the footpaths, the roads, the curbs and channels, they're very simple projects. They have a lot less inputs. But in actual fact, we do a lot higher volume of those projects. So that's an example there on the screen of a very simple project, looking at what the potential embodied carbon reduction opportunities are in that project. And unsurprisingly, it is concrete, it's asphalt, it's bluestone, it's aggregate, and possibly some emissions reduction from selecting carbon neutral service providers. Okay, let's jump to the next slide. So moving on to the next level of detail, what we call the bottom-up measurement. So unsurprisingly, we decided to tackle that simple stuff first, the stuff that we do the most of, that high volume work. So what we did was we took our top 10 standard drawings by spend. So we looked at 4 years in the past, looked at all of the infrastructure that had been delivered based on our standard drawings. And we took those top 10 and did a detailed carbon footprint of them. And those top 10 broadly fit into 5 categories. They are asphalt road, asphalt footpath, bluestone footpath, bluestone curb and channel, and other concrete works. These 10 standard drawings represented about 85% of our civil infrastructure services contract, and it worked out to be about $95 million over that 4 years. So it's the biggest chunk of our spend with the least amount of complexity. So what we undertook was embodied carbon footprint per unit, which is kind of what you see there. You can see the drawing, the specification at the top there, which is an asphalt road. And then within that, that next box, it breaks it down by material type and looks at the total embodied carbon of each of those layers and spits out a single number, which is GWP, or kilograms of carbon per square meter of that standard drawing. So this gives us a very detailed look at our standard specs. It also gives us an automatic reporting mechanism. So the calculations basically give us a carbon multiplier to overlay on existing reporting. So we already report on how many meters of footpath, how many square meters of footpath we deliver in a year, how many linear meters of curb and channel. Now we can overlay this to see precisely what the embodied carbon is of all of that work. Next slide, please. We also obviously wanted to look at what the opportunity was for embodied carbon reduction from these works. So you can see there, it was another quantity surveying firm that did this work for us. They've looked at a number of interventions, material substitutions, and expressed what the carbon reduction opportunity is. So what it takes, if you just implement one of those lines, it takes it from 49 kilograms down to 47. And so we can toggle these in and out on any project. We also sought some guidance around what the cost implications were of choosing one or any of these low embodied carbon options, because we know dealing with internally with engineering and capital works, they do everything to a budget. So we wanted to be able to kind of cost in the carbon reductions and be able to dispel the myth that this was going to come at significant cost.
One more minute, Paul. Sorry, mate.
Sure. So if we just jump to the final slide, this is an example of this in action. So the Queen Victoria Market Renewal Project, we took a streetscape that was already designed, swapped in low embodied carbon concrete and asphalt, and did a BAU footprint and then an as delivered footprint. What it showed was there was a 38% embodied carbon reduction from the concrete and about 20% from the bitumen, from the asphalt rather. But most importantly to the bean counters here is that represented only a 0.21% increase in the total project cost. So that was really important for me to be able to make the business case for rolling out at least these two interventions on a much broader scale. And that's me.
Paul, thank you very much. Fantastic. I love the term you used, liability, to get the message that, hey, this is important, we've got to do something about it. Also, just the way you prioritize what's going to be the biggest bang for the simplest projects and just the materiality of that. I think we can all take something away.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks for those insights. I look forward to you coming back to the panel discussion in a few moments' time. Our next speaker is from New South Wales Government. Alberto Jimenez is a long-time friend of MECLA, and he's a Senior Policy Officer, New South Wales Government, specifying low-carbon concrete. He's got experience developing, delivering and evaluating programs, services and actions to facilitate improved environmental performance across office buildings, commercial office and infrastructure projects. Most recently, Alberto has worked with the New South Wales Department of Climate Change, Energy, Environment and Water, a department that changes its name pretty much yearly, but it's good to have some continuity, Alberto, and that you're still there. But growing the market for low emission building materials within New South Wales is fantastic. Also great that the New South Wales Government shares this with other jurisdictions. So Alberto, please, tell us what you know. Really looking forward to this. Thank you, mate. And 10 minutes, I'll tinkle a cup at 9. Over to you. Oh, you're on mute.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alberto. I work with the New South Wales government within the Office of the Environment and Climate Change on the Low Emission Specifications Program. What we're covering today, most recently, we completed a project with New South Wales government agencies in which we developed requirements for low carbon concrete and updated their specifications. So today I would like to present on that experience. So if you are a council thinking about reducing embodied emissions, I hope you benefit from the learnings about the process we took to update our specifications. I'll also talk about the updated specifications and its requirements for low carbon concrete. And lastly, I would like to flag an upcoming project in which we hope to work with councils across New South Wales to update these specifications as well. If you're not in New South Wales, we will work with MECLA. So staying in touch via our MECLA working group for councils might be a great way to get some of those learnings from that project. So I would like to talk about our authorizing environment. Obviously, we have the New South Wales net zero plan to achieve 70% reductions by 2030 and net zero by 2050. But in addition to this plan, and much more relevant to infrastructure and embodied carbon, we have the decarbonising infrastructure delivery roadmap developed by Infrastructure New South Wales. So Infrastructure New South Wales, this roadmap is incredibly important as it sets out a bit of an umbrella and structure around managing embodied emissions. Most importantly, the roadmap help agencies set in a structure, especially around measurement, providing a consistent approach to estimating and measuring embodied carbon that will be applicable in New South Wales. My understanding is that there are discussions with infrastructure ministers around the nation, and they are aiming for this measurement framework and guidance to become national. So a bit of context, I would like to think that if you are a council seeking to manage embodied carbon via material selections and the use of specifications, you may find yourself in a similar situation to this, perhaps unsure on how materials are specified within your own operations, unsure of where to start. So it is important to have that framework to work on measurement, procurement, planning, designing out materials, and understanding that the use of specifications for material selections is just a small part of this pie. You may also be unsure about the availability of low emissions building materials in areas outside metro regions, and aware of emerging supply challenges with fly ash and slag. So with that context, 12 months ago, we set out to work with New South Wales government agencies to update their specifications and include requirements for low carbon concrete so that they can better specify low carbon concrete in their infrastructure projects. We did this we partnered with AROP to develop the project methodology. We worked with 3 New South Wales government agencies during stage 1. These were the Western Parkland City Authority, Water Infrastructure New South Wales, and Health Infrastructure New South Wales. And we set up working groups with each of the participating agencies. Ideally, this included sustainability people, as well as project teams in charge of the implementation of the specifications, as well as leadership groups, executive directors, procurement teams. We had to talk about cost, risks, etc. So after we set up the working groups, we did a gap analysis on the specifications that were currently being used and wanted to understand whether there is specifications made any mention of SEM levels, etc. In the context of councils, I understand that most councils have standard drawings for typical details, such as drainage, footpath, curbs, signage, etc. And some councils then might also have specifications. The standard drawings usually outline requirements such as a concrete grade or strength, but they do not usually speak to any requirements with respect to sustainability, such as the use of supplementary cementitious materials or other alternative materials. So in this project, based on the gap analysis, we went then and drafted the specifications. The new specifications included recommendations to include low carbon concrete requirements. And these requirements were informed and drafted by engagement with industry. And we were hoping that they would be reflective of current industry capabilities. I won't go into details, but you should know that industry confirmed availability to supply low carbon concrete as per these specifications. So we went and drafted the recommendations. These are all of them. Not all of the recommendations were implemented. It was still up to the agency to approve which recommendation they wanted to implement. So this is just a list of them. We workshopped these specifications with agencies, and more importantly, we develop information to support the implementation of specifications. And this is usually that gets done at the end. You go through the project, and at the end, you develop the information and the guidance. But for this project, it was important that we develop those guidance and fact sheets before we were even able to engage executive directors and our leadership teams. Given the large amount of questions, technical and commercial questions around the implementation of these specifications. So we really went in to battle with these fact sheets and guidance ready in advance. The result was we have 3 agencies. We updated specifications, 1 set of specifications, and 4 fact sheets, and many briefing sessions to government, and we'll continue to brief industry this in January and February. Happy to share the package of the specifications and the fact sheets to the product group after this presentation. Now, the specifications themselves, these are the low carbon concrete requirements that we developed. These specifications set limits for the allowable amount of cementitious materials in concrete mixes and provide 2 options. The first one is a prescriptive approach. So we said minimum of 50% SCM replacement by weight for all concrete being used on the project. And this approach acknowledges current capabilities within agencies. So we know that industry is really keen to push towards performance-based specifications, and we will continue to do so. But in the meantime, we need to acknowledge that some of these agencies and I'm pretty sure councils may struggle with their capability in terms of measuring embodied carbon. So until we reach that state, we give an option for it to be a bit more prescriptive approach. Now, we do have a second approach, which is that performance base, for which we have a minimum 40% embodied carbon reduction for all concrete being used on the project. And for that, you may need to use EPDs. Now, the specifications also set limits for the allowable amount of cementitious materials in concrete mixes. And the specifications also set targets for alternative aggregate materials to be used as a replacement of natural aggregates, with focus on circularity and the use of industrial byproducts in concrete mixes. Now, the specifications feedback from the agencies, we do not make mention of the use of recycled plastic. So that topic is left out of these specifications. Now, that project was we conducted over the last 12 months with those 3 participating agencies. The objective now for the next stage of the program is to extend that work and replicate it to, if we can, and as applicable, to councils within New South Wales, as well as any other agency that we couldn't work with during stage 1. So we will, the plan for stage 2 is to work with agencies and New South Wales councils, update their specifications so they can, and help them update their specifications and tailor the process to their needs so they can better specify low emissions concrete. Now, we will, I will be, this is slide. I will be in terms of context and reference, stay tuned via MECLA. We will be reaching out. Thank you. Stay tuned via MECLA. We will be reaching out for recruitment and participation to councils in February of 2024. And a bit of reference, the specifications were developed by they are authored by Arup Australia and published by the Office of Environment and Climate Change. Again, reiterate the call, reach out or stay tuned by MECLA. We will be reaching out to councils for recruitment for stage 2 of the project. And let us know if you like access to the specifications themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Alberto. 8 seconds to spare. Couldn't have done it better. Well done. Hey, look, thank you very much for taking us through the process as well as the outcomes. Fantastic to see such co-development with industry. So talking with suppliers, with users of materials, tapping into some consulting expertise as well. The chat is alive. Sorry, the Q&A is alive. I'd encourage everybody to pop their questions in the Q&A. I was mistaken saying chat as well. It's Q&A is the easiest way to manage that. And Alberto, you've got some homework. Get into the chat. Lots of people firing up and asking lots of questions. And I think we'll be very keen to read the outputs of your project. If you could share those or pop some links in. Looks like you're doing something that is in high demand. So thank you very much for that. I look forward to seeing you in the panel discussion as well, Alberto. Thank you, mate.
Thank you, Hudson.
All right. Our next speaker comes from the supplier part of the ecosystem. I'd like to welcome Dylan Viviers, the National Specifications Manager for Wholesome, bringing in a variety of geography. He's joining us from Queensland and will take us through a case study with the city of Brisbane. Dylan's been with Wholesome for about 15 years, transitioning into the concrete division 7 years ago. And that's something he was always wanting to do. He's got a passion for the environment, sustainability, and the construction industry, which has led him to the National Specifications Manager role that he holds now. He plays a big role helping educate and assist architects, engineers, councils like us today to work on early design phase of projects and how that can be leveraged to specify low carbon concrete. Dylan, I know you've been a big contributor for a long time to MECLA. Thank you for that. And thanks for sharing your expertise today. I'll hand over to you. I'll ding after 9 minutes and ruthlessly cut you off after 10. So over to you, mate. Thanks very much.
Yeah, look, I think the key thing for us since we launched our low carbon concrete was the importance of that early engagement and collaboration. And the project that I'm going to take you through, the case study I'm going to take you through, absolutely signifies that. And it's about working with all parts of the industry to help educate on and demystify the myths around low carbon concrete. You know, 5-10 years ago, there was so many bad experiences with contractors trying to use low carbon concrete in the way of set times, workability, all that side of things. But innovation has come so far when you talk about admixtures that go into concrete, and the technical design and makeup of concrete alone now is so far advanced and is changing every single day, which is amazing. So the project I'm going to take you through is the Brisbane International Cycle Track, which is all part of the 2032 Olympics. Now, the project is on an existing asset, and it was about reworking that to make it into an international level cycle track that not only was just for cycling, but was also for skating, multi-purpose use, clubhouse side of things, and then to carry on well into the future once the Olympics was got passed. So I think the key things that I want to take you through is basically the timeline of events, and I can show you some data after this. But you know, we started collaborating, or I started collaborating with Brisbane City Council back in March 2022, and that was by way of a presentation. So a cold call email to the planning and design team, basically we put on a lunch and learn session, which was very interactive, and took them through low carbon concrete, how Brisbane City Council can start to utilise it and transform some of the footpath work that they were doing. Off the back of that conversation, and over the course of April and May, there was ongoing communication and collaboration about a few different projects that they had coming up. Obviously, the Brisbane International Cycle Track was one of them. That collaboration was very much about council trying to, the representative within council, trying to understand, you know, from a performance perspective, how did our low carbon concrete stack up, looking at historical test data, asking for project examples, what sort of applications can it be used for? Obviously, cost came into that. And it was about just trying to work through every single step of that process with not only the design team, but also the engineers. So we wanted to work through and build a level of confidence, and obviously trying to get our product specified into the project. Finally, in June, we actually had a second meeting, second face-to-face meeting, where it was all about getting the final tick off, working through with the project engineer and project design team on how to actually write a low carbon concrete, or the specification for low carbon concrete, that would ensure that it was stayed in there and the contractors couldn't substitute it out. All that was a process that we did. We worked through it together. And then in August, September, I think the project went to tender. That whole process was very much, once it was out to tender, it was then my responsibility to also collaborate and communicate with each of the tenderers and the contractors pricing the project. Had they heard about Colson's EcoPact low carbon concrete? Were they comfortable with it? Were they familiar with it? I think there was a couple of contractors where we actually did trials prior to this project even starting, so that they could understand that it performed just like conventional concrete. So it's about establishing that trust in us as a supplier, and a level of confidence in what we've been doing. So we've had our low carbon concrete in the market for 3 years now. So it's been very much for the first 2 years about that whole education piece. We've seen a significant change in industry through councils as well as architects and engineers over the last 12 months, which has been amazing. Once it was out to tender and the project was awarded, it's not then just about, okay, you've specified low carbon concrete, off you go. It's following all the way through with contractors as well, making sure we had technical representation on site. The concrete was performing as it should. It wasn't holding up schedules. With this specific project, they wanted some really different oxides in the mixes for some of the works. So we worked through that with them as well. So that's the process, basically, that we went from start to finish, just to make sure that council were 100% confident in what they were specifying. The contractors knew exactly what they were getting, and the project ran smoothly. So this is just some of the data to date that I wanted to share. Basically, the total cubic meters that we've supplied is 1,667 across those different mixes, as you can see here. That was the breakdown. So for us, and I've had a conversation prior to actually presenting today with the contractor on site to ask if there's been any issues with the supply, any issues with the concrete. They haven't had any today. So all concrete's performed exactly the way they would expect conventional concrete to perform. But this is the sort of saving that they're getting. And look, I base these numbers on the LCI reference case. So for this first column of numbers here is the basically the embodied carbon for each of those mixes. You can see the LCI reference case in the second column. Then you've got third column is your reductions per cubic meter. And then the last column is tons of CO2 reduced based on the volume of that mix supplied. So 394 tons of CO2 reduced. The project's not complete. It's still in construction, but to date, we've supplied 1,667. So it's quite amazing when you think to go from, in 2022, with Brisbane City Council and the 2032 Olympics that has a massive focus on sustainability, to actually delivering this project as the first infrastructure project basically linked to the 2032 Olympics. So for us, it's a very proud moment, but it's also about working with all councils across Australia. And I've just listed a couple of different ones here where we've actually seen local councils driving sustainability and pushing the boundaries on how they're actually specifying concrete. So City of Logan has actually asked for a maximum. They don't want the 32 MPA to go above 210 kilos of CO2 per metre. So they're actually restricting, so they'll not exceed those numbers. That's quite amazing and quite innovative for a council to specify like that. We did quite a bit of work with them leading up to that project, and these are actually for precast mixes. So another hurdle altogether. And then in WA, obviously we love seeing wholesome and eco-packed being specified, but they're starting to ask questions now of the contractors by saying, you know, we want an extra overprice for low carbon concrete. That's amazing. And we should be doing that. All councils should be really driving hard to ask tenderers to provide that sort of pricing as well as conventional concrete, because there's going to come a time when low carbon concrete is cost neutral with conventional concrete. And I honestly believe that in the not too distant future, it's going to go the other way, where low carbon concrete is going to be more sustainable. And that's it from me, Hudson. Hopefully that wasn't too short.
Dylan, that was fantastic. And 8 minutes 35, even with microphone challenges. So, hey, terrific to see that that's on both sides of the country, Queensland and WA. And really, I mentioned in the introduction saying that transition risk is one of the things that MECLA helps address. And the way you've talked through the many steps of change management, the education from pre-design specifications, being on site to make sure that it works when it's delivered, and it's not just, you know, not just the white collar solution, but the blue collar delivery also works. I've heard that terminology used in several of the working groups to make sure that solutions are practical. I think that was a fantastic example of that. So thank you very much. Please hang around for the panel discussion. And I think you'll find plenty of homework for you in the Q&A as well. Lots of questions coming up. So really appreciate your experience and sharing it with us today. Thanks, Dylan.
No worries.
Wonderful. Well, speaking of WA, we're going across the country now to David McLennan, who is the CEO of the City of Vincent. I chatted to David in a preparation session for this and was really taken with what he called the overnight success that took 10 to 15 years of wrangling to get it to work. So David's got a terrifically varied background, as well as being current CEO of City of Vincent. He's worked in local, state and federal and international levels of public policy. He's been the Assistant Director General for the Department of Planning. So in terms of planning levers, he will certainly have his hands on those and know how to make them work. But he's also been a former diplomat with DFAT, Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, with postings in the UK, Peru, Mexico, and Papua New Guinea. So quite a frame of reference you bring to the table, David. Thank you very much for joining us. I've heard a little bit about this case study, so I'm very excited to hear the what, the why, the how, and how we can share it with other jurisdictions around the country. So over to you. Thank you very much. Your 10 minutes starts now.
Thanks, Hudson, and thanks to all the previous presenters. That was informative and educational for me. So as Hudson introduced the session, local governments play essentially in two spaces. Local councils are organisations in their own right, delivering capital works, delivering projects, and are actively involved in construction through the assets which a council is responsible for, the ones you use every day, which are your roads, your footpaths, the drains, your parks, and also the community facilities, the pool you might have swum in this morning, or the library you might go to on the weekend. And while the collective weight of councils as organisations and infrastructure providers and asset managers is significant, within Australia, most of the big infrastructure works, the freeways, the highways, the big bridges and the big tunnels are usually done by state government authorities through the Main Roads Department or the Public Works Department. Local governments play an incredibly important role, not just in its role as an asset provider, but also as a regulator of the building and construction industry. And the lever that local governments have most direct and day-to-day control over is around development assessment and the planning process. Most state government jurisdictions operate in a similar sort of way, and local governments fit under state legislation on planning and on building. And on the building, we haven't talked too much about the state construction codes and how that aligns to the National Construction Code, but that can wait a little bit later for the panel session. But the state governments are generally aligned very closely under the National Construction Code, which does set the minimum requirements for built form throughout the country.
David,
and also
can I just check, are you wanting to share slides? Because at the moment we've just got you.
Yes, I've got a few slides. I haven't started to share, but I will, because I can.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, sorry to interrupt you.
Thanks, Hudson. On the planning side of things, most state governments have pretty similar planning and development legislation, and local governments are at the pointy end of implementing that planning legislation. And local governments are particularly involved in the development assessment process, and it could also be around the subdivision process. So most local governments have to develop their own planning schemes, their own planning policies, and their own local planning framework, and can use those local planning policies and the local planning framework to try to drive change, to try to achieve the outcomes that the community wants. And with a prompt from Hudson, I'll share a few slides. So our community for a long time, for over 10 years, has been concerned about the poor quality of the built form of the developments that both state and local governments have been approving in the city of Vincent over 10 years. And the form of our built form, both in apartment developments, but also in single and group dwellings. And today I wanted to talk more about the requirements we've introduced for single homes and group dwellings, because most state government jurisdictions have worked quite hard to increase the minimum standards around environmental sustainability for multi-unit dwellings and for apartments, and the city of Vincent has certainly seen that, and we're getting a high level of design and outcomes around apartments compared to 10 years ago. The city of Vincent, like most councils, have local planning policies, and we embed our desires and the objectives around the environment and sustainability into our built form policy. And over the last 10 years, we have moved from a situation of providing discretion around increased height for apartment developments, which did produce or integrate higher sustainability outcomes, both in terms of the initial construction period, but also the life cycle costs. And most recently, we've introduced requirements around environmental sustainability for single and group dwellings. And this is somewhere that state governments across Australia and local governments haven't usually gone into, because you immediately start getting into issues and concerns around affordability and whether you're going to make it too expensive or more expensive for mum and dad to build their new home. And we figured out a way to essentially get the outcomes without impacting costs and actually saving money for homeowners over the long term. So there is a myth or a misconception that a building, whether it's a big apartment or a series of townhouses or a single home, will cost you more. And to design it in an environmentally sustainable way will take longer and it's more complex. But there tends to be a general lack of awareness in the market by the consumers about what an environmentally sustainable home means over the course of the time that you build and then live in that home, which could be 20, 30 or more years. There are also quite strong limits to how far local governments under their state construction, building and planning legislation can vary the requirements which are set in terms of minimum standards by state governments for both building and planning. Most state governments mandate quite consistent planning schemes, which we all have to work within. There are state planning policies, and it's quite hard for local governments to vary or be inconsistent with those state planning policies. In Western Australia, that's called the residential design codes. And most councils will require the state government's approval for any variations to state government standards. And I've already mentioned the high degree of alignment on the National Construction Code and the very slow process to bringing up those minimum standards to require environmentally sustainable buildings over the long term. What the City of Vincent did in terms of trying to specify and enable more environmentally sustainable outcomes in the single and group dwelling designs that we were receiving as a planning authority was we went through a long process over several years to figure out whether or not you can prescribe certain things around energy and water and come up with a checklist. But we always run into that situation, particularly in the City of Vincent, where we've got very small lots. It's an inner city area. We're not in a greenfields subdivision area. We're not building from scratch on cleared lots. We're trying to retrofit new buildings or to refurbish or extend existing dwellings within a very confined space, very tight blocks, tight lots. And what we've seen over 10 years is homeowners are trying to get as much house onto those quite small lots as possible. That's not leaving any space or room for green areas, for mature trees, or for planting new trees. So we are concerned about the urban heat island effect and also the loss of tree canopy on private property. What we tried to do with our planning policy is set new requirements around energy and water at that early design stage. And we worked very closely with a local company in Leederville in the City of Vincent called Circlos. It was originally called eTool, to essentially come up with a simple, user-friendly life cycle assessment for a single or group dwelling. Previously, when we're talking about those bigger builds with apartments and multi-unit development, they are multi-million-dollar projects, usually have architects and designers on board, and they can absorb the cost of having a specialist sustainability consultant undertake a life cycle assessment for those big construction projects. And that'll only be a small percentage of the overall cost. What wasn't available was a easy to use, do it yourself, affordable life cycle assessment for mum and dad developers or people just trying to build their first home to understand how to incorporate environmental sustainability and try to meet our requirements around energy and water use. So through Circlos, we trialed and successfully saw some outcomes on our requirements for a big reduction in life cycle carbon and also life cycle water use in the developments that the development proposals that we were getting to assess. And that is a tool which is available through the CERCLOS website. It's available internationally now. And we've demonstrated that through some simple design interventions early on in people's thinking about designing their new home, that you can achieve very significant outcomes through this performance-based assessment of using that life cycle. So it doesn't mean you can't have a pool in the backyard. Probably does mean you're going to need to put solar panels on the roof for the energy, but all the other thinking around lot orientation, building orientation for passive solar design to make sure that the building is working for the resident around heating and cooling, creating cool shady areas and access to natural light. All of those different interventions we can now capture early on in the design process, which means we're getting much better designs and much better applications up front, which is helping and improving the assessment process. And we're seeing much better outcomes on our streets in terms of the buildings which are being built. We're now taking that one step further. We've got a series of education materials, which I mentioned is an issue for the community, trying to increase people's level of understanding about how to build in a sustainable way. And the next step that we'll be launching in the next few weeks is providing an advisory service from the city's own design review panel to assist potential developers, people thinking or planning to build their new home, to be able to access an environmental expert from our design review panel. We will also reduce the cost of the development application fee if you submit an application which meets those targets in terms of the environmental sustainability objectives in our built form policy. And we've agreed to fast track the assessment process for those applications as well. We're calling it our green track assessment process. And we've seen that this works. We've seen that it doesn't add extra costs. It actually is going to save money for people living in those homes over the next 20 or 30 years. The process and the tools that I've just talked about are infinitely replicable across local councils throughout Australia, and I'm looking forward to discussing it more in the panel session.
David, thank you very much. It's inspiring to hear how you've approached that to make it as affordable and as informed as possible for, as you say, mums and dads wanting to build a home, and just the general market. I think most people dialed in would realise there is a pretty low level of energy and sustainability literacy in the community. But to hear that it needn't cost more and it will save an operational cost of living, particularly at the moment, that's a win-win. So thank you for setting out how you're doing it and sharing the resources. I'm now going to ask our panel leader, Corrine Taylor, to turn her camera on. Corrine, among other things, she chairs the subgroup for local government within our working group 1. So Corrine is the manager environmental projects at City of Sydney. She leads systems change at the city, covering embodied carbon reduction, sustainability and asset management, capital works, events and venues. She holds a master's in public policy and a broad career history, including various state government departments and leading environmental consultancy firms. So another multidisciplinary thinker joining us. Corrine, can I ask you, we've got 20 minutes. Let's ask our other speakers to turn their cameras on. Boy, we've got an engaged audience today. Yeah. The Q&A is alive, but I'll hand over to you and tink my coffee cup when there's about 2 minutes to go just to wrap up. So 20 minutes, over to you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Hudson. And I agree, there's been some really fantastic questions in the Q&A sections, and hopefully your very specific questions have been answered by our speakers as it has progressed. I'm going to take Q&A speaker prerogative though and ask a question that isn't necessarily in the chat, but I think talks to some of the themes that I saw coming through. And it's around the tension between the risk we have with climate change, bearing down upon us versus the risk that our asset managers have in terms of delivering quality assets for our community, and sort of the tension between the two. So over my career, I've noticed that we sort of, as local governments and the state governments, have a tendency to do sort of trials, pilots and showcases, and then we sort of watch that for a while and we watch what everybody else is doing, and then eventually we leap on that. And the recent UNEP emissions gap report says that we need to cut emissions by 28% by 2030, so a short 7 years away, to get to even the 2 degrees Celsius pathway, let alone the 1.5. Whereas at the moment, the trajectory says it's a 3% increase. So arguably, we don't have time for extended trials and waiting for people to get that confidence going through that sort of method. So my question to you guys is, how do we sort of align this impasse on thinking about the risk and taking a jump? So making sure our engineering colleagues are confident, but that we're hitting that sustainability imperative that we all have. How do we get people across the line? Anyone got any thoughts? Big curly question.
I'll jump in because it's a challenge that I've had to face, certainly on the project that we had at Queen Victoria Market, just around some pushback from our engineering people. We got two materials swapped out, and a third one was rejected. I think for me, the benefit of MECLA is that we have such a broad church of policymakers, product manufacturers, developers, and it is a big clearinghouse for a lot of that information. So I think the way to overcome that risk appetite is to have at our fingertips the information that we need, and that's something that I think MECLA offers. Because I can ask somebody else in MECLA for the information rather than having to go and do, having to go and do an engineering report here at the City of Melbourne, and then Sydney doing one and Mirvac doing one, and that's what it offers, I guess.
Dylan.
Yeah, thanks. Look, I honestly think, like I've kept saying, we've come so far in the last 2 to 3 years, and that's not just Wholesome, that's all concrete suppliers, the Borrells, the Hansons, independents now have EPDs for their concrete. So the whole industry, concrete industry, is driving in the same direction the whole construction industry is. We can't supply concrete that doesn't meet the Australian standards. It can't go out the gate. We can't supply concrete that doesn't, well, sorry, let me rephrase that. We have to supply concrete that meets the performance requirements of the specification. So specifying a low carbon concrete, verified by an EPD, but still has to meet 32, 40, 50 MPa, this shrinkage, whatever the performance characteristics are, we can design the mix to achieve that. And I think it's having that confidence in, I can only talk to Wholesome. We've been on this journey 3 years. We've supplied 200,000 cubic metres into Melbourne Metro. We've supplied the level crossing removal project. And it's not just us, it's all concrete suppliers are on this journey. And it's having faith that our technical teams know what they're doing, and will design the mix to meet what you guys need it to do.
That's a great response. Alberto, I'm going to throw to you then. Your specifications project, does it help address this particular issue? Yeah,
absolutely. So in regards to using SEMs in concrete, I think the use of SEMs has been proven for other applications in trains and transport, and it's just a matter of taking those practices into concrete. But it's not all concrete used in bridges. Some of concrete used in schools and hospitals. So it's a matter of taking some of those learnings from the application in those spaces and applying it to this particular application. It's been an exercise in kind of collecting those case studies and information and putting it in front of the risk teams and the procurement teams, and as well always ensuring that concrete meets those performance specifications.
Yeah.
First and most.
And I guess, David, as the CEO of a local government organisation, you must consider these sorts of trade-offs, and how do you balance that risk on a regular basis? Have you got any sort of insights for the rest of us?
just on the question about sort of risk appetite, most councils or organisations will have their own risk management framework, and if you're doing this from start to finish, you'll have your governing board, whether it's the state government agencies, executive, or a local government council, will set risk appetites on all the different risks that a council can face. And you set your tolerance statements for risk, and the City of Vincent has a high risk tolerance at the council level for interventions which result in better outcomes around sustainability and the environment. So we've essentially been given a mandate by the governing board, the council, to have a high risk tolerance around interventions as a council and an organisation which achieves better environmental outcomes, not just for the environment, but for the community as well.
Fantastic. And that is a really good reminder that using those sorts of frameworks can help get those decisions made and make everyone feel more sort of comfortable in the decision they've made. And I guess speaking on behalf of the City of Sydney, because I'm a chair, but also City of Sydney, we've been looking into and delivering low embodied carbon for quite a while. And a big shout out to my colleagues in our civil works project who have been using low embodied carbon concrete in our footpaths for quite a while now, and happy to get that risk right and to make the right decisions, because we all, want to mitigate and reduce our carbon emissions as quickly as we can. So we've been on that journey as well with the rest of you. Okay, so there's been some really great questions in the Q&A section. Thank you all for that. And I guess sort of moving this question a little bit further. I think we just answered this one. So there was a question from Anonymous that I had highlighted, and let's just check, maybe we all just answered this one, that said, New South Wales currently have no requirements for accredited engineers designing and specifying transport infrastructure. So this, Alberto, this was about your talk, but I think it's a bigger sort of question. How do we assure that EPD accredited products provide the safety and durability performance that's required? It needs to be more than just low carbon. So I think that's probably the next layer down. We talked about specifications meeting the Australian standards, but I guess even beyond an EPD, do people look for more proof of what's going on, or simply saying this meets your specification standards and the Australian standards enough, have you found, when using these products in either in your own projects or trying to sell into the market?
So yes, so we just need to ensure that low carbon concrete designs are robust from a safety and durability perspective. So we know that for current low carbon concrete with SEM replacement materials and slag, there is a significant quantity of data which is available and which needs to be used to inform how we move forward specifying low carbon concrete. We are expecting a reduction in the supply of fly ash and slag over the next 5 years. So we'll need to be adopted to achieve low carbon concrete outcomes. And for this concrete, the creation of additional knowledge in this area will become much more significant. And just hoping that this knowledge gets triggered up or flows towards the update of the relevant Australian standards.
And any other comments from the panel on that sort of safety performance flash? David, go for it.
Just a comment. All local councils survive entirely on federal and state government grant funds to resurface their roads, their local roads. If the federal and state governments wanted better outcomes in terms of the carbon in all the local road resurfacing, which is a huge amount of our overall embodied carbon, both the federal and state government could just require higher standards in procuring and contracting those works.
Great comment. It brings me to one of the other questions, but I'll go to both Paul. No, Paul and Dylan have some thoughts on that, and then we've got another question that ties into that one. So Dylan, what was your response?
Yeah, look, I think it's having access to historical data. And Alberto, you would have seen a lot of those test reports and that data, but like I said, we've been doing it 3 years. We have so much data now on all our mixes for all applications. There's not a single application that we're not supplying low carbon concrete into. So ask for that data, historical data on specific mixes for specific type of application as proof of evidence.
Cool. All right. So there's a question that I think rolls into this conversation from Tony Collister, who talked to the IPWEA through IPWEA, so the Institute for Public Works Engineers Australia, I think is what that stands for, start to adopt standards for simple infrastructure like footpaths, instead of each council having to have separate specifications, which could enable innovation and recycled products to be adopted without having to go through separate approval processes for each council separately. So that sounds like a really clever idea. So I guess my question is, what's stopping us doing that? Why can't we do that? What's going on that means we can't have those big universal standards that we can all talk to? And I think maybe Alberto's project's trying to help deal with that. David, you took your microphone. Oh wait, Paul didn't get a response. The next one, so he gets to go first this time. I
think one of the things that might stand in the way of that is the specific character of each LGA. So our specifications are going to be slightly different to others, just because the way we specify our footpaths is going to be different. I think if it was for individual products, that makes sense, but not necessarily for individual specifications. So
for the parts of the audience that don't necessarily understand local government specifications, when you say our footpaths are different, do you mean essentially, say, I'm going to talk to the City of Sydney's experience. So we have a different stone that should go into the CBD on a footpath versus the stone that perhaps is used in, say, Glebe as a suburb, or Redfern as a suburb. Is that what you mean, that the specification sets the design highlight for the space, and that's why?
But also the depth of aggregate, the depth of the concrete slab that sits under the stone. Those things are all going to be slightly, I assume slightly different, if not incredibly different from LGA to LGA, especially across state borders.
David, you had your microphone off, so it sounds like you've got a response as well.
I need to mention that yes, IPWEA in Western Australia do produce guidelines on subdivisional works, which is where you're putting in the roads and the footpaths. And that can be a guide, is really a guide for local councils to follow to try to help with that standardisation process. But it's not mandatory, so it's not enforced, even though it does provide that standardised benchmark. I don't think there's too many reasons other than different temperatures between the north and the south of the continent that when you're particularly around concrete anyway, that we don't really need very different footpaths between the 540 local councils in Australia and the different states, and most of our roads are pretty similar. So if the federal or state government wanted higher sustainability outcomes, we just need to lift the minimum requirements in those processes.
It sounds like a great takeaway on both questions. Alberto, we'll leave that over with you for the state government to take those ones up in New South Wales, and you can obviously influence the entire country at the same time, can't you?
Absolutely. So stage 2, first step will be to develop the specifications and work with participating councils. Obviously, stage 2 is how do we roll out the dissemination of those specifications. So this is a great idea. We'll consider it.
I'm also aware that there are various industry groups across Australia looking into this particular issue and trying to work on it. So Ausroads, for instance, has been developing a carbon tool for roads to think about how we calculate and measure that. My understanding is that first iteration of that, they're hopefully trying to get out next financial year, and that Infrastructure New South Wales work that you spoke about, Alberto, and trying to make that as national as possible, because as we've learnt from the neighbours experience, so the National Australian Built Environment Rating Scheme, which rates the built environment across Australia, if you can harmonise your measurement and harmonise your benchmarking across the country, then we can get the kinds of changes that we all need in the innovation space. So with 3 minutes to go, I'm going to ask a lighter question to round us out, which is, where should we all start? So for those of us on the call who've been doing this for a little while now, giving advice to those of us on the call who perhaps are wondering where we should start. So where should someone from local government who wants to be in a space in a couple of years' time where they can say, we're addressing our embodied carbon and here's what we're doing, maybe the first 2 things that they should do. Paul, you pulled your microphone off first again, so over to you.
Well, in case it wasn't clear in my presentation, measure, measure, measure. It will help you with the business case for why you need to reduce embodied carbon, because it quantifies the size of the problem and therefore the size of your carbon liability in your organization.
Fantastic. David, do you have a thought?
I thought just like whether it's sustainability or elsewhere, anything in government, no one needs to start from scratch. It's already been done somewhere else. Adopt best practice wherever you can find it, and do that quickly. Don't try to start from the beginning. If you're one of the 540 local councils in Australia and you're the one sustainability officer in that organisation, you're not alone. You're not a sole voice in that organisation. You can reach out to your local government network and figure out who's already making progress in this area, and try to lift the performance of your organisation as quickly as possible.
That's very good advice. Dylan, do you have any thoughts for where we should start?
Absolutely. I think start having the conversation with your supplier. Very first thing. And then, we did a trial with Sunshine Coast Council, just on a very small section of footpath. They wanted to understand what the embodied carbon reduction they could get on that little piece of footpath. They wanted to understand if their contractor would be happy placing it, was happy placing it. So Wholesome, and don't tell everyone this, but Wholesome gave them, 2 meters of concrete so that they could actually trial it, use it, see it, touch it, feel it, and understand it. And from there, it's gone on to other things. So have the conversation.
Fantastic. Alberto, penultimate. I'm going to have the ultimate statement, and then we're going to hand back to Hudson.
No, yes, I agree with the panel. Do not reinvent the wheel when it comes to measurement. There is some principles coming out of infrastructure agencies nationally, so just make sure to align to those. And I'll put a call to material suppliers out there. A lot of the councils are concerned that there might not be availability of these materials in areas outside metro. So if you can find a way via MECLA to kind of, express your capability and availability of these materials to councils and infrastructure agencies, I think that would be very helpful and complementary.
Fantastic. I had a set of 4 things I applied each one of these. You've covered off most of them. I think my final one is grab opportunities. You can have the best strategy in the world with the best steps in the world, but if you find someone in your organization that wants to do something now, work with them, because that enthusiasm will get you very far. Hudson, Q&A is completed. Back to you.
Thank you, Corrine. That was fantastic. I think the combination of expertise and practical advice today has been really powerful. As you know, MECLA is all about sharing. So thank you for sharing today. And I'd encourage everybody who's dialed in. You are change makers. We are all change makers. Take what you've heard, take the snippets of advice, of practice, of information, links to data, answers to questions, and make changes where you work. I think that's how the urgency of climate change can be addressed. We stay on the front foot and we make positive changes in our own organisations. A big thank you to Paul Whelan from City of Melbourne, Alberto Jimenez from New South Wales Government, Dylan Viviers from Wholesome, David McClellan from City of Vincent, and Corrine Taylor from City of Sydney. Great coverage across the country. Thank you all very much for putting yourselves out there, for informing our audience today and contributing to MECLA. Thank you to our audience for joining us today and for contributing to the questions, to the discussion. A recording of this presentation and the discussion will be uploaded onto the MECLA website as soon as it's polished a little, and an email with the link will be sent to registered attendees. I'd like to express my gratitude to Monica Richter from WWF for kicking MECLA off and bringing her brand of systems thinking and endless optimism and drive to make MECLA succeed. Similarly, a big thank you to Kati Verheyen and Alexi Barnstone from Climate Kick. They make the Secretariat work and keep us on track. All of the admin behind the scenes that have all of our self-organising groups organised and active is down to them. So thank you, Kati and Alexi. This is our last MECLA event for 2023. Can't quite believe I'm saying that, but I'm really looking forward to building further momentum to reduce embodied carbon in our ecosystem in the new year. For now, that's it. Thank you for joining us today, and I look forward very much to seeing you in 2024. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.